I heard her screams before I even saw the crowd, and by the time I pushed through the circle of people, I witnessed something I never thought I would see in my hometown: a group of grown adults throwing rocks at a homeless Apache woman, as if she was not even human. And in that moment, something inside me snapped, because all I could think was how anyone could look at a terrified woman curled up in the dirt and decide she was some kind of monster worth hurting like that. And it still makes my blood boil just remembering it. So tell me, was I wrong for what I did next? Or would you have done the same thing if you were standing where I was standing that night? Because honestly, I still replay it in my head and wonder how different things could have gone. Anyway, let me start from the beginning, because none of this would make sense otherwise. And yeah, this whole thing still feels raw to talk about, but I guess that is the point, right? So this woman, her name, as I learned later, was Nita. She had been living on the streets for months, and I had seen her around the outskirts of town mostly, keeping to herself, rarely speaking to anyone, and dressed in layers of old blankets. She looked like someone who had survived way more than she ever talked about, and even though people knew she never bothered anyone, rumors started going around about her, like how she was dangerous, how she practiced dark magic, how she cursed people, and I swear I even heard one drunk guy say she transformed into animals at night, which was insane. But you know how small towns are. One whisper grows into a whole story, and suddenly people start believing the nonsense they created themselves. I remember passing her by the grocery store about a week before everything happened, and she was sitting cross-legged, humming softly with this faraway look in her eyes. And when I handed her a bottle of water, she took it gently and whispered thank you in the kindest voice. And I kept thinking how easily she could have been anyone's mother or grandmother, and how much pain she must have gone through to end up alone like that. But people did not want to hear it. They wanted a villain, someone to point at, someone to blame for all the little miseries in their own lives. Then came that night, a Friday, of course, when everyone was drinking just enough to lose their better judgment, and someone claimed Nita had cursed his dog or something ridiculous like that, and suddenly a dozen people were marching down the street, shouting at her and calling her names. And by the time I reached them, they had started throwing rocks, tiny ones at first, then bigger ones, and some of the women were yelling for her to leave forever, while she was crouched on the ground, covering her head, shaking so hard it broke my heart. And I just could not believe this was happening in front of me, with no one stepping in. So that is the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. And before I tell you what I did next, I want you to stop for a moment and think about it honestly. Because if you were standing in a crowd watching people hurt someone, defenseless, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you step in or walk away? So comment that below before you hear how things unfolded, because in that moment I felt something fierce rise in me, and I stepped right into the middle of the circle, pushed the guy in front of me backward, and yelled at everyone to stop. And yeah, they shouted back at me, telling me to mind my business, telling me she was dangerous, telling me she brought it on herself. But I did not care. I crouched down in front of Nita, trying to shield her, and when one of the men tried to shove me aside, I swung around and shoved him so hard he stumbled into the dirt, and the crowd finally hesitated long enough for me to help her to her feet. And let me tell you, she was so light, so fragile. It was like lifting a bundle of sticks. I wrapped my jacket around her and started walking away with her, leaning on me, shaking and silent. And I expected someone to grab me, but no one did. They just stood there, muttering and pretending they had done nothing wrong. And I walked her all the way to my truck, helped her into the passenger seat, and drove her to my ranch outside town. And the whole ride she stared out the window with tears running silently down her face, not saying a single word. Over the next few days she stayed in my spare room, mostly sleeping sometimes, whispering little bits of her story about how she had lost her family, how she had nowhere left to go. And every time she spoke, her voice was trembling but filled with this quiet dignity, like she refused to let the world take everything from her, and the crazy part is the town actually came looking for her. Not out of concern, but because they said I was hiding a danger, and people even tried to confront me at the ranch. But I told them to leave, and eventually they gave up because they realized I would not budge. As weeks passed, Nita slowly healed. She helped with small tasks around the ranch. She smiled occasionally, and every time she thanked me, it felt like she was thanking me for way more than a place to sleep, and it made me realize how close the world had come to destroying someone who had never harmed anyone. So here is what I learned from the whole mess. Sometimes the real monsters are not the people sleeping on the street or wandering alone. Sometimes the monsters are the ones who let fear and ignorance turn them cruel, and if we do not stand up in those moments, then we become part of the cruelty too.